say that tonight is actually the culmination of about 4.5 years worth of conversations, letters, faxes, and the timing has finally been propitious to make a very special guest. Why we were so interested in Jim is that his work came at, I think, a very important time in the recent history of American narrative filmmaking. I would be one among many who would credit his films with reinvigorating American narrative films, with having really the same impact on filmmaking in this country that John Cassavetes had in the late 1950s and early 60s, in coming up with a new cinema that was grounded in the urban experience, in concrete details of a lived reality that was much closer to our lives than the films that came out of the commercial studio system. You'll hear more about Jim Jarmusch from our visiting critic who was here last about 3 years ago in connection with the retrospective of William Klein's work. If you have our monograph on Jim Jarmusch, you'll have read his writing. Jonathan Rosenbaum, who has been our partner in a number of projects here, but most especially our advisor in preparing both the retrospective and dialogue for this evening and the parallel program that plays out on Tuesday evenings, the Guilty Pleasures and Innocent Influences program that gives you a little bit of a sense of the context of work that led to, I think, a really unique sensibility in contemporary filmmaking. So Jonathan Rosenbaum from the Chicago Reader, an author of a co-author of Midnight Movies with Jim Hoberman, a forthcoming volume called Placing Movies to come out with his earlier autobiographical Moving Places. Then finally an extraordinary volume that he put together with Peter Bogdanovich last year on the writings of and critical commentary by the late Orson Welles. So it's been about 4 years to say this, but it gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome here to the Walker Art Center for a Regis dialogue, Jim Jarmusch and Jonathan Rosenbaum.
Thanks.
What are all these people doing here?
It's very hard to see you all.
No slam dancing or body surfing during the show.
I thought maybe one way of beginning, let's say, is asking Jim, how did you first get interested in movies? When did it start?
In making them or just enjoying them?
Enjoying them first.
The first movie that I remember really having an impact on me was the Robert Mitchum film Thunder Road that I saw on vacation in a drive-in theater with my mom and my sister in Florida, and I was about 6, I think. And previous to that, I'd only seen Walt Disney movies like Son of Flubber and those kind of things. And to see a movie with all that violence and action, that's when I really started being interested in the screen being alive like that.
Now, how old were you then?
I don't remember exactly, maybe 6 or 7, I think.
After that, did you see lots of movies, or?
Well, I didn't have much. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, and there wasn't a big selection, although there was a theater called the State Theater that had Saturday matinees that they would show, like The Fly or Attack of the Giant Crab Monsters. They would show a double bill every Saturday, and my mother used to drop me off there so that she could really, I guess, get rid of me for the afternoon. So I used to go there a lot. I loved going to see those films. So other than that, in Akron, there really wasn't much until I was a teenager, and there was what was back then they called an art house, which meant they showed like European sex films on the weekdays, and on Friday nights they had this program called Underground Cinema, and we used to go there all the time, and we had fake ID cards saying that we were old enough, and there we saw like a lot of different things, including Chelsea Girls by Andy Warhol and some Stan Brakhage films mixed in with Reefer Madness.
So this was like in the 60s?
This was
Yeah.
in the late 60s, early 70s, yeah, late 60s.
Well, at what point in all of this did you decide you wanted to make films?
Well, I didn't decide at all until I went to college to study literature. I really wanted to be a writer. And my last year, I guess, at Columbia, I studied in Paris. And it was there that rather than attending the classes I was supposed to be attending, I ended up spending most of my time at the Cinematheque or in movie theaters. And when I returned to New York, I had no clue like what to do with myself. So I was really interested in movies by that point, and my writing was starting to take on elements of screenplays as little, sort of like, I don't know if you know the Burroughs book, The Last Words of Dutch Schultz.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's written in a way like a screenplay, kind of fake screenplay. And some elements like that were entering into my own writing. And then I applied to go to NYU Graduate Film School. But it was just, I don't know why I even tried, because I had no money and I had never made a film. And for some reason, they accepted me. I guess that's why. So then I got financial assistance and went and started studying film there.
That's interesting. So actually, was the trip abroad at Columbia your first trip out of America, or?
Yes, it was the first time I'd ever been. I don't even think I'd been in Canada, which is way out of America. If you're from Akron, you know, Toronto is like...
No, well, I'm mentioning it just because it seems to me one thing that's, to me, almost unique for your films is that they're the films of someone who actually, of an American who actually seems to feel at home outside of America in some ways, and which is very unusual. So it was something I've never gotten around to asking you when you'd first been to Europe, but that was...
Yeah, I don't know if it's that I feel... How did you put that?
Well, at home. I guess what I mean
I
is...
feel not at home in America, but
Yeah.
not necessarily at home outside of America.
Yeah. Well, that seems a better distinction, actually, yeah. So I take it was while you were at NYU that you actually made Permanent Vacation, or was that after?
Yeah, well, that's... I began making Permanent Vacation as my thesis film at NYU Graduate Film School, but I had been given I had gotten ironically enough, a fellowship called the Louis B. Mayer Foundation Fellowship. So they mistakenly sent the money to me rather than directly to the school to pay my tuition. So I used that money to make the film rather than pay tuition. So I did make the film, although I didn't at that time get a degree from the school. They weren't pleased with the fact that I didn't pay tuition. They also weren't pleased with the film I made. So.
Oh. And was that the very first film you made, or had you made any shorts?
No, I had made 2 or 3 short films before that as a student, which I think are lost, hopefully lost forever.
And was in terms of, so it was basically the Mayer grant that paid for the film altogether, or did you had to go for other sources too?
Yeah, I got some phony car loan too at the time from a bank, so I was able to make the film. The budget was about $12,000.
Now, one thing that it seems like it's true of a lot of your films, but I'm not sure whether it's true of Permanent Vacation too. I have the impression that you actually do casting before you write your scripts often. That in other words, when you write your scripts, it's with very particular actors in mind. And I'm wondering if that was true at all of Permanent Vacation also.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I still consider myself, and I don't consider this to be derogatory really even, but I think of myself as kind of a fake film director, because I started making films with my friends, basically, and writing things with them in mind, and have kind of continued that procedure, although my availability to actors or to people with more experience has widened. So that's changed, and because I've made films and traveled and met people because of the fact that I've made films, I've met people who also work in films and actors, and so now that scope is widened, but it's still pretty much the same premise. I write with an actor in my head for a particular character, and if I'm not able to hoodwink that person into being in a film or whatever, then I rewrite it thinking of someone else, but I still work that way.
Well, I know that like John Lurie is in Permanent Vacation, and I think let's say the only one in, let's say, a very large role, I think, who probably has stayed with you on other films. But were many of the other actors also at NYU, or any of them, or were they,
no, none of them. In fact, none of the people in Stranger Than Paradise, except for Esther Ballant, were actors at the time. John and Richie Edson were musicians and had not acted. Although John had made several Super 8 films of his own in a kind of Jack Smith style. I don't know if you've seen them. One's called Men in Orbit, and I forget what the other one is. But
well, what about Chris Parker?
Chris Parker was a kid that I met on the street, a friend of mine. He was 14 when I met him, and we used to go to CBGB's almost every night back then, this is late 70s. And Chris Parker was a real kind of fast-talking con man. And he had a way he knew Hilly Crystal, who owns CBGB still, who used to somehow he'd get in, and then he'd go to the back door where they load equipment in and open it for me to get in, because we didn't have money to pay to go in, not every night. So he was like, I used to hang around with him, and he used to sneak me into CBGB's, and he was a friend of mine, very interested in all kinds of music, particularly bebop and punk rock, which seems like a kind of odd combination, but somehow makes more sense now, I guess.
Well, maybe that sounds like a pretty good lead into actually the first clip we're going to be looking at, which is from Permanent Vacation, and features Chris Parker along with an actor named Frankie Faison, is it? Or Faison. So maybe we could look at that now?
Sure.
Well, I'd be very curious to know where exactly that story came from.
That's a joke that I forget the comedian who originated it. I heard it on the radio late at night once and just lifted it. I don't remember whose joke it is. But I think you can see why they didn't want to give me a degree.
At the same time, though, the poster that you see behind them is for The Savage Innocents, which is a film of Nicholas Ray, and Nicholas Ray was one of your teachers at NYU.
Yes.
Did he play any role at all on advising you on this film?
Well, that was the main reason I went back to NYU. It's a 3-year program, and my 3rd year, when I had run out of money, I went to the director of the school, Laszlo Benedek, who directed The Wild One, and he said, listen, Nick Ray is going to teach here this year, and he needs an assistant, and I think you would be good. And I said, yeah, but I came in to tell you I'm not coming back to school. I don't have any money. So he said, listen, come tomorrow and meet Nick, and I'll see if I can help you get this fellowship to come back to school, the Louis B. Mayer Fellowship. So I came and I met Nick Ray, who was like a big hero to me at that point before I ever met him. And he asked me that day if I would be his assistant in the school year. So that's why I returned to school, basically. And I was writing this screenplay toward the end of Nick's life, actually, and was showing him the script. And he, well, it's kind of a boring story about the script.
Well, I know, but he did advise you on it, though, to some extent.
Yeah,
right?
he kept telling me. All right, okay. He was telling me that he kept giving me advice about the script, saying that the script is too slow, there's not enough action, this kid should kill his girlfriend, and she should have a gun in her purse, etc. And my script had much more action at that time than it eventually did, because whatever he would tell me to do, I would do the opposite. And so I kept taking the things out that he liked somehow. And at the time, I don't really know why I was doing that. Now I realize why, because I didn't want him to think that I was just a puppet and would do whatever he said. So by the end, when I kept bringing him back the script with more of the action taken out, and I would watch his reaction, which was usually, he was dumbfounded. And then he would say, well, I don't, it's getting further in the other direction. And finally, when I gave him the completed script, he said that he was very proud that I didn't take his advice and that I followed my own style. So, but I really wasn't conscious of why I was doing that at the time.
One thing that's interesting in this is it's sort of like it's kind of like a hallmark of your style that we'll be seeing in some of the other clips, is that this is mainly a very long take, this sequence. There are two cutaways, I guess, to Chris Parker, but otherwise it's just kind of giving the screen to an actor and sort of letting them go. Was this something that you arrived at through a conscious decision of wanting to do that? Did economics play any role in it, or?
Certainly,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I only did one take, I remember, the long joke. I didn't even have a second take to select from. But primarily that style came from just purely from economics. And I made this film, too, partly inspired by a film by Amos Poe called The Foreigner, that he shot for like $5,000 or something in 77, 78, which was a kind of punk-spirited film. And, he and his friend, Eric Mitchell, who became my friends, were saying, come on, Jim, you could make a film too, So I was inspired by them, and they used that same kind of, basically similar style because of financial reasons. But one thing I wanted to say, this scene's shot in the lobby of the St. Mark's Cinema that doesn't exist anymore, where at the time I was working as an usher. It was like a $2 theater or something, and I was the new usher, so they used to make me do things like, Jim, get your flashlight, go down there and tell those Hells Angels there's no reefer smoking in the theater. Stuff like
Actually,
that.
I didn't recognize it was St. Mark's, but that seems very appropriate, because that was a kind of tourist theater in a way. I remember seeing things like Howard Hawks' Red Line 7000 there, and it's one thing that's curious, though, is that the soundtrack, if I'm not mistaken, that one hears during this scene is not Savage Innocence, but it sounds like
it's a double bill.
Sergio Leone. Is it a Sergio Leone?
Yeah, but it was a double bill, and you couldn't see the other poster in there. Yeah, it's from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Tell me what happened when this film, let's say, was finished. Did you find a way to show it, or did it take a while, or?
Well, I first gave it to NYU, was having a film festival of its films by its students. And not only did they reject the film and send it back to me, but they sent a really nasty letter saying, basically, what is this shit, So then I was lost. I was playing in a rock band at the time, and I thought, okay, well, I made a film. I'm not going to make any more because no one's going to let me, but at least I made one film. And then this guy, Mark Weiss, in New York, he somehow saw the film and said that he would like to select the film for a film festival in Germany, in Mannheim. And I didn't even know any film festivals existed except for I'd heard of the Cannes Film Festival. And so I said, wow, great. And the film was shown in Mannheim, and not only that, he said, well, they'll fly you there and you can go to the festival. And I was amazed by that. I had no idea that, I could get a free trip to Germany out of this film. So I went there, and the film won a prize there that was about $2,000, and I had no money. I was behind on my rent, and I had these kind of mafia landlords and stuff. And so I came back not only with the $2,000, but then WDR bought the film for German TV, which paid back the cost of the film. And the film was then asked to be in the Berlin Festival and then the Rotterdam Festival, so then it sort of started for me.
Yeah, I remember there was, in fact, as I recall, after your first film, an issue of, I think, the German film magazine Film Critic that was devoted to you, or devoted to the film. Yeah.
Yeah, all of which was a huge shock to me.
And at this point, it hadn't shown in the United States, apart from Ed and White.
To this point, I don't think it's shown in the United States.
Except for this clip.
Yeah.
So, all right, that's interesting in itself, in the sense that that you, in a sense, had your, let's say, were discovered in Europe long before. Let's see, certainly well before Stranger in Paradise. Now, there's obviously, in terms of financing Stranger in Paradise, I know that started out as a short. I mean, with the intention of making it a feature.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And I know that there were ways in which you were helped at different times by things like getting footage and so on, or maybe raw stock, by, I think, both Wim Wenders and Jean-Marie Straub and Daniel Huillet at different stages helped.
Yes.
But what point did that happen? In other words, how did you initially get it set up?
Initially, Wim Wenders and I had worked, because I was working with Nick Ray had asked me to be his kind of gopher during the making of the film Lightning Over Water. And at that time, I of course met Wim Wenders, but I was the only person on the crew that was asked by Wim. So I was pretty much asked by Nick to be part of the production. So I was kind of treated as an outsider. But then Wim saw this film. I started shooting this film the day after Nick died, actually. And it was shot in 10 days. And Wim saw the film after it was done. And then 2 years later, or a year and a half later, Wim and his partner at that time, Chris Sievernick, said that they had some unexposed film material left over from the film The State of Things, and said, look, you can have it, and you can make that's a lot of the cost right there. You might want to there's enough to make a 30, 40-minute film. So then I wrote the first part of Stranger in Paradise because I had that film material available to me. And then Jean-Marie and Danielle gave me other film material to be exposed for the black sections as leader. So they both helped me. And then I was further helped when making it while I was editing the first half-hour version, I wrote a script for the longer version. And when the short version was done, I also had a script to try to continue it. And I was helped by Paul Bartel, who loaned me some money to buy the rights of the first part back from Chris Sievernick, who did some kind of fishy things legally to me and had the negative under his name in a lab and things like that. So he kind of held it up for ransom, and Paul Bartel loaned me the money, who I met just by chance, also I think at a film festival. And he had just had some success with his film Eating Raoul, I think, at that time. And he said, well, what's the problem, And I explained to him, and he said, oh, well, I'd like to help somebody starting out because I'm in the position I have a little money, and you can pay me back in a year. And he was really a kind of an angel in that way to help the film. That allowed me then to get, the money from German TV. Before that, I couldn't get financing because I didn't own the film. So he helped me, and then I got German TV money and a German producer named Otto Grockenberger to help finance the remaining part of the film. So I had really amazing people helping me out. I don't know why, but they did.
One thing I've always been curious about is, the Hungarian aspect of the film. Does that relate to anything in your family background, or is it in terms of people you knew, or?
Well, it's two things. My family on my father's side was Czech, and my grandmother, who was a lot like the Aunt Lottie character, was Czech. And Esther Ballant was a member of the Squat Theater group in New York, theater company that was a kind of experimental theater company from Budapest that were friends of mine, and a lot of our friends used to hang out because they lived communally on 23rd Street in one big building, which was also their theater. So it was a combination of those things, I guess.
Well, I think sounds like we're probably at a good point where we could look at a clip. I think the clip we're going to be looking at from Stranger Than Paradise is fairly early it's in the first section of the film, and it's shortly after Esther Ballant turns up in New York and arrives at the apartment of her cousin, Willie, I guess. And her name is Eva. And so this is actually the first scene when she gets to meet Willie's friend Eddie, played by Richard Edson. So, I noticed in this scene there's another sort of little film reference when Eddie's reading from the paper. The one, I think, title of a film which is real, I think, is Tokyo Story.
Well, they're horses, the names of race horses.
Yeah.
But there's a few Ozu in there.
Oh.
Ozu films.
Passing
Late Spring, Passing Fancy.
Oh, yeah.
I've stuck a few in there. Yeah.
That's right. It's worth pointing out that in this the series here, there's going to be the flavor of green tea over rice.
Not a good name for a racehorse.
No. But would you say there was? Do you feel an affinity with the let's say simplicity of Ozu's style, the idea of just sort of putting the camera in front of characters and?
Oh yeah, very much. I mean, I'm kind of contradictory in my own tastes. I like very much things that are very pure in a way. Ozu's films, or the films of Carl Dreyer, or things by Joseph Cornell, or Cy Twombly, or music by Anton Webern, or the Ramones, for that matter. The things that are very pure really appeal to me strongly. I also like very messy things too, though. Like, I like Blue Cheer, or paintings by by Jackson Pollock or de Kooning, or I like King of New York, films like that. Detour by things that are also messy appeal to me as well. But my own aesthetic tends to go toward a more kind of pure form of things.
Well, one thing I've always liked about the stretches of Black Leader and Stranger Than Paradise is that they make me think of the shots as being almost a little bit like blues choruses. That it's sort of like it's a way of bracketing scenes in a way. You think of them as units much more. Just like reminds me of in the earlier clip when he tells the joke. He says, "This is the joke that has this this title." How did you hit on the idea of those? And did you spend a lot of time editing them? I mean, in terms of timing and so on.
I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how long they should be, and they do vary somewhat. But they were originally in my script because I wanted a way of. I didn't want a hard cut from one place to another. I like that, like a blues chorus, or almost like a respiration, a way of like letting the image sink in before another one hits you. So they were intended from the start, but we did play around with exactly how long they should be, I remember.
Did it make the shooting of this film, the fact of having those kind of long takes, would you say it made it harder to do or easier?
Well, it works both ways. I think it's better for the actors because it's more like theater where they maintain their character longer rather than having to be, and working with actors not real experienced with film acting, and myself not experienced at this as a director, that was helpful. It also makes it more difficult because we had very little film material, and if any one of us makes a mistake, then the take is ruined, so you have to go back and start the whole thing again. So it kind of worked both ways.
I'm also curious that both before and after you made this film, how easy or difficult was it that the film was in black and white. In other words, did you encounter any resistance from I don't know, distributors or people putting money into it, or?
Yeah, definitely, because they would always say, well, we can't sell it we can't get a good price for video, or we can't sell it to television, so we can't pay you much for it. Before making the film was not a problem, because the film material offered to me was black and white, and when I wrote the story, I knew that it would be black and white. But after the fact, it was kind of problematic, and at that point, in 1982 and 1984, even then, black and white was not like fashionable on MTV or whatever. It was still kind of, they really kind of balked at it as far as distribution and sales to TV and video. So it was kind of problematic selling the film, although more so in the States than in Europe for some reason.
Well, I guess black and white hung on much longer, and it seems like that even now it's still easier to make probably black and white. Maybe not now, but at least up to a few years ago.
In Europe?
Yeah.
Probably still now, I would think.
It seems like that there are even still labs where it's possible to do it in Europe, which becomes harder.
Well, it's getting difficult everywhere because the really great black and white technicians are old guys that have retired, or they haven't passed that expertise along really. So, and it's a very different thing to light black and white also than color. Although, directors of photography are aware of that. Younger ones, because they can shoot. But now black and white's more expensive to shoot than color. The processing is more expensive.
So it's becoming now it's the luxury in a sense.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of resistance to it, I know that Tim Burton had a lot of trouble. He had to leave one studio to make his film about what's the film he just completed we were talking about?
Oh, the biopic about Ed Wood Jr.
Ed Wood Jr., yeah, he had a lot of trouble making that in black and white. Tim Burton.
Well, maybe Schindler's List will help him along. Now, have you had some of the same problem? This comes up in the later films, actually, but when you use subtitles, or has that been? In other words, has there been a comparable resistance from anyone about?
Yeah, I've had trouble in Europe because I have refused, with few exceptions, to allow my films to be subtitled. And in Italy, it was very unusual to release down by law with subtitles, because the Italians dub their own films, even the ones in Italian. So, that's been a problem. I have not been able to make TV sales to larger TV stations for prime time viewing in Europe or whatever with subtitles.
It's always seemed to me that there's something contradictory about it, because although it's considered box office poison in the United States, a film with subtitles, people tend to forget that Dances with Wolves has lots of subtitles. More recently, Schindler's List, that there seem to be lots of films that have subtitles that don't bother people.
Well, also, if you have an interesting actor, their voice is 50% of their performance.
Yeah.
So you're taking that away as well. It's kind of like being ripped off, I think, when you dub an interesting actor. It's, sometimes dubbing is funny. I like the kung fu style dubbing. And now I will take you to my father.
Yes. Well, I've heard in Italy, one reason why it's so important to dub so much there is because accents are very important. That for different parts of Italy, there have to be different kinds of regional accents, and if they do it wrong, people laugh in the wrong places and so on.
But Fellini, I met Fellini, the first time I met him was when Down by Law was being released in Italy, and he said to me, "But Jim, why you don't dub the film?" Because Fellini will shoot a scene and have the actors just say numbers, just count, and he'll write the dialogue later and put it in. So I like the face but not the voice, so I choose one for voice, one for face. So
Well, in
he
a
was
sense-
very confused by why I was adamant about it.
Well, in a way, I think what it means in effect is that most Italian filmmakers like Fellini are really silent directors. In a
Fellini
sense.
maybe, particularly in a way.
Marcello.
I awoke from a strange and disturbing dream. I like some of those Italian movies, they have the same guys, dubbing each film. You start to recognize the voices.
Well, speaking of Italians, how did you meet Roberto Benigni? Or how did you encounter him, let's say?
I met him in Salsa Maggiore in Italy, in a small film festival where I was the one and only, first and last time that I was a member of the jury, and he was also. And I met him, he was on the jury, and also a mutual friend. We had a mutual friend. And from the moment I met him, I just fell in love with the guy. And he spoke no English, and I spoke no Italian, and we spoke for hours in gestures and bad French. And if French people would have heard us, they would have, been...
Was Not Enough Room to Swing a Cat something that Roberto had come out with at one point, or?
Well, we collected so many things. I don't remember what came from where anymore, but possibly. I know that when I first met Roberto, he had subscribed to a magazine in Italy that was to teach you English and had a lot of ridiculous expressions. So a lot of those we pulled together from there, and they ended up in the film.
How did you hit on the idea of doing this in Louisiana?
Mostly through music from New Orleans. I'm a big blues and R&B fan, so I had never been to New Orleans when I wrote the script, but I had a lot of images in my head, mostly just from the music of New Orleans. So that just kind of drew me there.
And were you thinking of prison films much that you'd seen, or?
No, actually I wasn't really. I was trying to figure out how to get characters that don't like each other stuck together, and prison. One quick way of doing that.
Yeah, there's an interesting way for me, which one of the themes of Stranger in Paradise is how the character is saying that no matter how much you keep moving around, things stay the same. And there's a way in this film that certain things repeat themselves. Like after they break out of prison, they find themselves in a shack where even the bunks where they're staying at are sort of like in the same kind of, it's
Yes.
like a duplication of where they were before.
Yeah.
Was this a much harder film to shoot, would you say, than Stranger, or was it easier?
This film was a lot more fun to make. Stranger was harder. We had less time, less money. In Stranger Than Paradise, we shot, if you'd see the whole film, there's a sequence where they're in a hotel in Florida, a motel, and that motel had 3 rooms in it. And the crew and cast stayed in those rooms, taking turns who would sleep on the floor, So it was not that much fun making Stranger Than Paradise. This was more fun. We had a real motel. We each had our own room, even.
And did you have
run-down motel, but it was fun there.
Did you have lots of time to scout locations and so on?
Yeah, I did. I did for Stranger too, though.
Yeah.
But I love New Orleans. I still love it. I just went back there a few months ago, and I just really love that town.
And were the locations that you used, did you do much to change them? I mean, to redress them, or were they pretty much usually as you found them?
In this film,
Yeah.
almost always the way we found them. We only changed them by the way we lit them or moved some furniture around. Or there's a scene where early in the film, Tom Waits' his character and his girlfriend Ellen Barkin live in a house that has graffiti and things on the walls. That was exactly the way we found. It was someone that we met there. A girl lived there, and her former boyfriend had been a disc jockey or something. There were records everywhere, and we just used her house exactly as it was.
And this was an actual prison that you.
Yes,
Yeah.
the Central Lockup, or the Orleans Parish Prison in New Orleans proper.
So there were real prisoners there at the time that you were shooting?
Yes, there were. In fact, I don't know what that was in my head, but I decided it would be a brilliant idea for Tom Waits and John Lurie and Roberto and myself, since I was making them do it, to be locked up in the prison for a day without the guards on that cell, in that cell block, or the prisoners not knowing that we weren't real new prisoners. So I was put in a cell with Roberto, and Tom and John were put in a cell. And it was pretty scary. We had to do everything you do, keep your hands in your pockets when you're out of the cell, and we were treated pretty roughly by the guards and the other inmates. But Tom, and it was good for Tom and John, they were, well, not that Tom doesn't have experience in jail cells, but they were actually kind of frightened by the experience. I, on the other hand, I was also, but I was in the cell with Roberto, who thought the whole idea was useless and was only talking to me about, yes, Jim, this is interesting, but tonight, which restaurant should we go? I would like a linguine al dente, very, so it had no effect on Roberto at all.
So I guess it must have been a relief when did the other prisoners feel angry when they found out that you were?
Well, we were gone by the time they found out.
So. Yeah.
Carefully orchestrated exit. So.
But I gather he must, through the experience of making this film, he must have learned English a lot better.
Quite a bit, yes. And he's very quick, obviously. Very intelligent man. He learned really fast. But we played a lot of games on him, tricks on him, teaching him the wrong things. And to this day still, although he now knows it's not correct, but he didn't for years, we taught him that to piss or to pee was to flame. We told him. And for years after, he was, excuse me, I go now to flame. I will come back after I flame.
How did he find out he was wrong, I wonder?
Well, he finally found out, and he played a trick back on John Lurie in Cannes at the film festival, where an Italian TV crew was interviewing John, but they did not speak English. So Roberto, no problem, I translate for you. So they would ask things like, how do you come upon your craft as an actor of Stanislavski, or method acting, or is it intuitive, or what? In Italian, and Roberto would say to John, I don't know why, but they want to know, what did you have for breakfast? And so John's response would be bacon, eggs. So he looked like a real idiot, and he did get back at us.
Well, it's interesting that there's a way in which it seems like a gradual, a steady, almost a curve, that from Stranger in Paradise to Down by Law to Mystery Train, your films become, let's say, more and more bilingual in some way, or even trilingual, in the sense that more and more of a foreign language is sort of like used and becomes more, let's say, central to what's going on in some ways. Now, do you think this is partly a consequence of the amount of traveling around you did with your own films and being in like other countries and so on?
Yeah, it comes from two things, I think. From the fact that I traveled and met a lot of people that that English is not their first language, and also because I've lived in New York for so long, and I live on the Bowery downtown, and in my neighborhood there are people speaking. There are Dominicans and Puerto Ricans whose accents are slightly different. There are like Hasidic Jews and Sicilians, and there's a lot of people mixed in there. A lot of Chinese, and so it's that too somehow. I hear different languages swirling around me every day when I leave my house too, and the fact that America is, that's what America is a lot of immigrants who committed genocide on the indigenous people here so they could take it over,
Well, it's interesting. It seems like it's happening, in a way, all over the world, more and more, that people are making films, sometimes in languages they don't know. For example, I just discovered recently that Kieslowski's Blue is in, which is in French. Kieslowski hardly knows French at all. That he had to, for example, speak to Juliette Binoche, the lead actress, in English when he was making that. The independent filmmaker John Jost just made a film in Italy in Italian, and he knows very little Italian.
Yeah. I think Max O'Foole's always impressed me by making films in English, French, Italian. He made that one Italian film, and in German. He probably spoke all those languages, though.
Yes, and I think Dreyer did also when he.
But you know what?
Yeah.
There's something interesting. I love to watch. I really got into, since I've been to Japan a number of times, I bought a lot of videotapes there that were not subtitled, of films by Ozu and Mitsuguchi and Suzuki and a lot of other people. And I like to watch them without knowing what they're saying. I've sort of got into that because language is a code that we communicate through, but even within that code, you can tell through someone's inflection what their emotional state is. And so the language of acting is not primarily a spoken language, and you can read how people feel or where they're at emotionally without knowing what language they speak. So my first experience really was directing Mystery Train, was directing the Japanese actors in Japanese. French I understand, in Night on Earth French I understand, Italian I understand a little. I'm learning more and more. Finnish I don't understand, but Finnish people's emotions are they're very open. You can always read their emotions. So I think language is secondary.
Well, one thing that also occurs to me that might have been part of your background that might have led to this, at least actually a background that we share, is that year that you spent in Paris going to films at the Cinémathèque. Because when I used to go to the Cinémathèque, Henri Langlois used to have this philosophy that he would just as soon, in fact, he'd even prefer to show you a film without subtitles, or if they did have subtitles, they wouldn't be ones that would help you. I mean, I once saw a Buñuel Mexican film that was dubbed into German and subtitled in Portuguese, for example. And he liked to do things like that, and with the idea that it wasn't. So I saw more movies than not. I mean, most of the movies I used to see at the Cinémathèque were ones that in languages that I couldn't follow and know.
Yeah, I saw Central European films at the Cinémathèque and other films I had no clue what they were saying. But the heart of the film, the heart of the story is still there, though. I mean, unless it's a totally dialogue-oriented film in there. But, it's you can read that.
Yeah, although it's a pity that there's so much of films in the world that are automatically considered non-commercial just because it's assumed that people won't be able to see something if it's in a language they don't understand. In a way, it seems like an awful lot of commercial decisions get made on that basis. In the case, though, for example, of working out the dialogue for Mystery Train, did you, in order to, for example, get the right kind of Japanese idioms, did you basically work with translators suggesting sort of in other words, was it always a question of trying to translate English ideas into Japanese or learning certain phrases and then trying to work with those?
No, what I would do is I would write I do a lot of rehearsing and improvs where the actors are in character, but the scene we're doing I write on the spot and it is not in the film. But it's maybe before the story begins. And with the Japanese kids, I would stick in, okay, they're going to go to the movies, and he wants to see a movie with Steve McQueen, but she wants to see a movie with Elizabeth Taylor. Well, I have those two words I know.
Yes.
I know Steve when he says Steve McQueen, and so I have some little guide in there. And then I give them the dialogue, and a translator tells them the idea of the scene, and then I watch their interactions with each other. Then once my script was written, we rehearsed it also, and with the translator, discussed a lot of nuances of how to express things with the actors, and we made joint decisions and eliminated phrases or replaced them, even though I didn't know myself. It was explained to me the difference of the nuance, and then we would discuss which one was appropriate. So it was not really a problem.
It's interesting. I have kind of before and after questions about this. First, did you ever get to see Mystery Train with a Japanese audience?
I don't think so, no.
Yeah.
I introduced it but didn't stay for the
Yeah.
films.
No, I'm just wondering if you found out that there were, in any way, different responses to it and to the Japanese segment in Japan, or
I don't know. My films are they're very popular in Japan. I don't know why, but and that one particularly, although Night on Earth did even better, and Down by Law was. All my films have been very successful in Japan, probably due to the distributors that I have, which are really excellent. But
how did you or where did you find the two Japanese actors?
well, Yuki Kudo, the girl I had seen. In fact, the first time I ever saw her was in a film in the film festival in Italy, where I was on the jury with Roberto, a film called Crazy Family. She was 12 years old at the time that she acted in that. And she was hilarious, and I was really drawn to her face and her kind of expressiveness and wackiness, you know. And then I wrote the part for her, and I had since then, Bernardo Bertolucci told me to see a film called The Typhoon Club that was not released outside, not here anyway. I saw it in Japan, and she was also in that. So I then wrote it for her, and then cast for the guy, which I was lucky to find, Masatoshi Nagase in Tokyo. But I saw about 50 young actors before I found him.
Did they speak English very much?
Yuki spoke a little, Masatoshi none, really, except rock and roll, you know. He spoke a little.
So you were having to direct through interpreters to some extent.
Yes, yeah, completely. I mean, I had an interpreter, but it's funny because even my language to them as a director was not somehow hampered by my lack of understanding the language words, but we were still able to communicate somehow.
Well, it's interesting, like as the experience you had with Benini, yeah.
Yes, and I taught them to say some really foul things in English, which they were very proud of.
Well, maybe we're ready to look at a little bit of. Actually, happens right near the beginning of Mystery Train. Tell me, the spiel that they get about Sun Records, is that a real spiel or is that a real tourist guide?
Yeah, we got the text from Sun Studio of the tour guide text and just had her deliver it in rapid fire. So it was a real text.
And was this? I guess this was Was it similar to Down by Law in terms of getting to know Memphis and so on? That you had, in other words, and it's again a case of, I guess, of being interested in the place because of the music. But did you spend much time there before?
Well, I hadn't been to Memphis when I wrote the script. But as soon as I was done, I went to Memphis to look for locations, and so it was again music that kind of drew me to write something so that I could go there.
And is Chaucer Street something you actually found there?
No, we had that sign made.
I see. Which is, I see it as a remnant, probably maybe a remnant of your English major background.
Well,
because I know you had the idea of it being like Canterbury Tales in some ways.
Yes, the form of the film is a little bit from Canterbury Tales in a way. But there are a lot of streets in Memphis named after poets. Quite a few. Chaucer wasn't one of them, though.
Did you find, because you use a very small part of Memphis in this, did you find that it was, did Memphis wind up surprising you or being very different from what you imagined? Or?
Yeah, it did, because the main center of Memphis around Beale Street was completely torn down in 1968-69 after King was assassinated to prevent, disturbances. So they just kind of razed the whole center of Memphis, which had been the largest, black inner city black neighborhood for years in the South, anyway. So it was a really vibrant, amazing place prior to that, and they just kind of tore it down. So the kind of empty lots and holes in places in the center of the city was very odd and kind of haunting and sad. But Memphis, anyway, consists of a lot of closed down gas stations and empty parking lots and and it still has a lot of ghosts around there. You know, you feel a lot of weird stuff in Memphis.
And was
Also,
yeah.
one thing that we shot later a lot of this film takes place in a hotel, and the building that we shot the interiors in was connected to the building from, which is on the back of it is right across from the Lorraine Hotel where Martin Luther King was assassinated, and they said that supposedly, you know, James Earl Ray supposedly assassinated King from that building, which was weird. We weren't aware of that when we selected it as a location.
Did you find it was harder to shoot in a city than, like, I don't know, sort of out in the country? Like, does it make much difference?
I don't know. I don't think it. You know, you run into different problems depending on where you are. It's just different. I don't think you could say one is easier than the other.
There's an idea sort of that you hit on in Mystery Trains. It sort of carries over to your next film, Night on Earth, which is the idea of all the different parts happening at the same time. Just wondering if there was anything in particular that inspired you to sort of start exploring that idea.
Well, there was one thing that I can recall, which was a book by William Faulkner called The Wild Palms, which is a book of two separate novellas that he wrote that the publishers at the time said, yeah, but, you know, Bill, we need a novel here. This is, you know, two short novels. That doesn't sell. So I don't know whether they suggested it or whether he thought of it, but he alternated chapters of two different stories that he wrote separately. And the kind of nuances and repercussions of doing that, the certain themes that exist in both stories and the way they work on each other is really, really beautiful and strong.
I agree, although I think I always heard it a little different the way he wrote it, that he started writing one of the stories, I think it was the love story, and then he found that at a certain point he felt it was missing something. So as a kind of counterpoint, he started the other story, and he actually wrote them in the alternating, you know, in terms of alternating between one chapter and another, and the way it was published. What happened, there was a problem, I don't know if originally, but at some point they got printed separately. But I find that what's interesting is when you read them separately as individual stories, they don't have anything like the impact of what they do when they're...
Yeah, I can't imagine reading them separately, really. But
It's interesting, though, that in that case, there's a simultaneity actually in the prose, but they're not necessarily taking place at the same time.
oh yeah, it wasn't the structure that I tried to imitate, but it was just that structure I found really inspiring. So I started a structure not the same, but somehow inspiration came from that. Certainly the Canterbury Tales as well, because it's a beautiful structure of people traveling and telling stories as they travel.
Right, there's even a parallel with the religious idea, because it's a kind of a religious pilgrimage that's being made at least by the Japanese couple, or you could say it's like it's going to shrines, actually.
Yes. And there's also Boccaccio's Decameron, where they're sitting, waiting out the plague, sitting around telling stories, which contains some of the same stories as the Canterbury Tales.
So when you were actually writing Mystery Train, were you working on the three stories at once, or at all, or were you, or just writing them quite separately? Or you were thinking of them all together, though, obviously, because there's a way in which, with the third at least, our memory of the first two become very important.
Yeah, I think as I always write, I make a whole lot of notes and collect them and then sit down and write them into the script. So that simultaneity was in my head before I started writing, that structure.
It's interesting that in a sense, what you've done, actually in a quite different way, I think, from other filmmakers, is return to the possibility of making shorts, even though they're interconnected shorts. Which, I mean, of course, there was New York Stories a few years ago, but that was by three different directors. And in most cases, there are very few cases where you have one filmmaker actually making short stories, that are sort of like put together.
Well, there's a tradition of Japanese, like ghost stories, like Kobayashi and a few other directors, I think, that have made episodic films like that.
Yeah, I guess actually, come to think of it, Kurosawa's Dreams is
But
one.
that's after. But yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of Italian light comedy tradition, but like you said, that's usually different directors doing each section.
Right, I remember there was a Seven Deadly Sins, that Italian one. In fact, there was both a French and Italian version of the Seven Deadly Sins.
But after making Mystery Train, I never intended to do that again, to make an episodic film like that, with the exception of this thing I'm working on over a period of time, a collection of short films called Coffee and Cigarettes. But those I write as I go along. It's not a project that I just do that and then it's done as a film. I'm sort of collecting them here and there. But I never intended to make another film like that. Night on Earth was just kind of an accident because another script I had written, for reasons I won't go into, I was not able to make and was frustrated, and I wrote Night on Earth extremely fast in about 8 days, initially just to shoot outside of America and work with some friends of mine in Europe and stuff. So
Was it hard to set up? In terms of,
it was complicated.
I bet. Actually, why don't we look a little bit now? I think what I've selected for a clip in this case is from the New York episode, which is the second episode in the film. And this occurs sort of like about halfway through that episode. But it lets you see at least three of the actors.
Is everyone still awake yet? Some people are awake.
I have to apologize. I should have explained, maybe, for those of you who haven't seen the film, that Helmut Grochenberger, who incidentally is, I guess, whose last name is an homage to your producer, yes, is in fact the one who's the cab driver, but because he can't drive, it's Giancarlo Esposito who takes over the driving, which is why he's at the wheel. One thing I really like about this sequence is, in this case, about how the sort of foreigner and outsider really, which what happens to a certain extent, I think, in Down by Law 2, but not in what we see here, really sort of humanizes the other two, or at least makes a real change in the emotional temperature, sort of what's going on. Well, I've been monopolizing, Jim, up to now. I think maybe some of you would like to have some questions of your own. I can see you a little bit. Yes.
Can you comment on your acting for Oscar Becky and Let's Drive Cowboys to America? Do you enjoy doing that?
Very bad acting.
Very good.
Well, I don't know. It was just a little cameo in this film. He's one of my favorite directors. It's Aki Kaurismäki, the Finnish director. And I like his films really a lot. So I was happy to do a little cameo in it. And then I just acted in a film, also a kind of cameo this past summer, shot in Finland, a biker movie called Iron Horseman, which Aki produced and a young French-Swiss director named Gilles Charmant directed.
Yes.
You and so many other great artists thought of acting. What is it about acting?
Well, I think the key is that come out of Akron. No, I don't know. Akron is a pretty dismal place. It's very, when I grew up there, everyone's father worked for the rubber companies, including my own and my uncle, and it was just a place my friends and I knew we wanted to get out of, so. What? Well, there was nothing to do there, so.
Yes.
A lot of the settings that you choose are those kinds of settings where there's nothing to do. They remind me of when I used to go to bowling tournaments with my dad in Elko, Nevada. So how careful, setting in your film seems to be as much of a character as the actors. How carefully do you choose those settings?
Well, you said it better than I could. I think the locations are as important or almost as characters in the film. So yeah, I choose them very carefully. And you're right, I do, and I do, I guess because I'm from Akron, have a kind of weird or perverse nostalgia for like kind of post-industrial places. You know, I find them beautiful somehow.
One thing I just want to inject, it's a pity, the one thing we have time to look at, although they'll be shown in this series, are some of the coffee and cigarettes.
Oh, we're not going to look at the last one? Or too late
I don't think we'll have time, but they'll probably have time. But I think, I'm curious, that in that case, though, that you use a set, and I'm wondering why that you decided to shoot those. I know that there's a kind of a use of a overhead angle that you use. That at least in a couple of them.
Well, it's not a sound stage. It's just a place.
I see.
It was a set built in a recording studio because the day before we had shot this. Did they see the video clip? You saw the Tom Waits thing, and then we used that same set the next day to shoot this short film, which was black and white, unlike the video. We changed it a little bit, but it was only a matter of convenience, really, you know.
And is it true that you're hoping, I mean, I've heard that you're going to wait till you've got enough of them, sort of like, that you made enough of those in that series and possibly release them all as a feature?
Yeah, I think I will. My intention is for them to work on their own, but at the same time, I've written dialogue that little things repeat in each one. It reappears. So I have shot 5 of them now. And eventually when I have about 12 or however many makes up, 80 minutes or something, I'll at least release them on video together. I don't know if anyone would release them theatrically.
It's also interesting to me the way that they, repeat certain camera angles too. That they're in. I've only seen a couple. I gather this was a series that actually started with Saturday Night Live. Is that right?
Yeah, they asked me to make a short film for them in whenever the first one was, 86, 87, and they gave me the money, so I made the first one. And then since then this is the 3rd, and then I have 2 more that are not edited but are shot. So.
Are they all in different cities, or?
No, I shot 3 of them in New York, and 1 in Memphis, and 1 in California. But I have more written too, or sketched, so I'm going to make some more now.
Well, I believe this is the most recent of Jim's works. Perhaps we've got time for just a couple more questions before we call it a night. Yes?
You talked earlier about your other cinematographers. How did you come about working with Frederick
I had seen his work, the films he shot for David Lynch, and particularly also a film called River's Edge that I really loved the way the photography fit the story. It didn't seem slapped on, it seemed to grow out of the nature of the film, the subject and the feeling of the film. So I was very impressed by his work and had met him briefly and also had read an interview with him that was what he said was very strong. And it was a lot like what I felt about cinematography, the way that it should grow from the essence of the film and not be a signature put over the film. And so I called him up and talked with him and then went to LA to meet with him, and he agreed to do the films, Night on Earth.
Yes?
How much leeway do you give your actors to change or alter your dialogue?
Well, we changed the dialogue a lot in rehearsals, like very much. I'm not interested in tying them to the script at all, except to the ideas of an exchange of dialogue, but not exactly how they phrase it. So I like to keep them in, within the way the script works, how things go back and forth, but how they say things, rarely am I adamant about. Sometimes I am if it's a very particular joke that I want them to retain. But I'm interested in them being the character and believable as the character. So we change things quite a lot, and a lot of the best things in my films have been things actors came up with during rehearsal periods in improvs that I then note down and put into the script. So really a lot of it comes from them.
Well, I think we're out of time, but thank you very much, Jim, and thank you all for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.